Welcome friends to Mani Bhavan for a very special function. I mean, it's special in many respects. The book that we are going to launch today, Gandhi in Bombay, has many interesting facets that of course you will read. Like Bombay, Gandhi was also an amalgam of many cultures. And that's why, they found that they were almost made for each other. Gandhi always felt at home here in Bombay, and Bombay accepted him as its own all the time. And this book is about the special relationship between a cosmopolitan man and a great metropolis. You will find very interesting things there. I'm not going to talk about it. The panelists, of course, are. Now coming to Mani Bhavan, there are so many places which are associated with Gandhiji's movement in Mumbai, with Gandhiji's own association with those places. Some of them have unfortunately not survived due to passage of time. But if there is one iconic place which connects Mahatma Gandhi to Bombay, that is Mani Bhavan. And that's why it's so appropriate that we are holding this function at Mani Bhavan, where Gandhiji used to stay from 1917 to 1934. And if you would have noticed, this year also marks the centenary of Gandhiji's first association with Mani Bhavan. So it's doubly appropriate that we are holding this function here. I must also tell both the authors have very graciously decided that all the royalty of the book will be given to Mani Bhavan as donation by them. We have very three eminent and distinguished people to speak about the book. Mr. Satish Sahani, Professor Bhikkhu Parekh, and Naresh Fernandes. They will speak about different aspects of the book, what they liked, how they respond to it. It's up to them. So without taking much of your time, I would request Mr. Satish Sahani, who is the Chief Executive of Nehru Center, to start today's proceedings. Satish.
Professor Bhikkhu Parekh, Dr. Usha Thakker, Mrs. Sandhya Mehta, Naresh Fernandes, Yogesh, thank you for that introductory remark. Friends, let me begin by complimenting the two authors for this delightful book, Gandhi in Bombay. I must mention that this evening we will talk only of Bombay and not Mumbai, because when the period that this book covers, it was Bombay. It starts with Gandhi's return from South Africa in 1915, and it goes on till Gandhiji's last visit to Bombay in July 1946. That was his last visit. And during this period, so much happened in this country. When Gandhiji arrived, there were so many people who were attracted to him. There was a galaxy of people who surrounded him. And there was spate of receptions in his honor, so much so that he got fed up and felt very uncomfortable. And at one stage, the book says, he told Kasturba, I was very comfortable with indentured labours. This building was the home of one Mr. Reva Shankar Jagjeevan. And it was also Gandhiji's Bombay address. And Gandhiji himself notified Mani Bhavan to be his Bombay address to the Chief Secretary of Bombay Province through a letter written in 1918. And from that time onwards, Mani Bhavan was the place where all activity took place. It is in the fitness of things that this book is being released at Mani Bhavan. This book tells us that it was not Sabarmati Ashram or Wardha from where Gandhi led the freedom movement. Gandhi led the freedom movement from Bombay. There were only three things that happened outside Bombay: Kheda, Bardoli, Champaran. Everything else which collectively we call freedom movement happened in Bombay. Rowlatt Act, Satyagraha in 1990, Khilafat movement, non-cooperation movement 1920-1922, Swadeshi movement, boycott of foreign cloth, protest against the Simon Commission, civil disobedience movement, and finally quit India in 1942. All this happened in Bombay. And All India Congress Committee meetings were held in this very building. This evening, while standing down, I was wondering how so many people could come here and decide the country's future. The time is too short, but a few things one must mention here. Gandhiji's three very important things were non-violent satyagraha, Swadeshi, and Hindu-Muslim unity. He told the people of Bombay that without the rule of Swadeshi there will be no Swaraj. He withdrew the non-cooperation movement because of one violent incident in Chauri Chaura in UP. His joining and supporting the Khilafat was a bit controversial because it brought religion into politics. Jinnah was opposed to it, and Tagore also questions its rationale. But Gandhi viewed Khilafat movement as an instrument to Hindu-Muslim unity. Unfortunately, that was not to be, because soon afterwards there were Mopla uprising in the Malabar, there were riots in Gulbarga, there were riots in Kohat, and in 1924 the biggest blow came to Khilafat movement when Turkey abolished the very institution of Khalifa. Gandhi's civil disobedience movement, though it started from his march from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi, little north of Bombay, where he broke the salt law. But the greatest celebration of the breaking of the salt law was in Bombay. And on the Chowpatty sands, people made salt out of seawater in the presence of thousands of people. And little small packets were distributed by the women. Women were the biggest ambassadors of Gandhiji. Gandhiji's Swadeshi movement and civil disobedience movement brought the women of Bombay to the forefront of the freedom movement. Burning of the foreign cloth. Elphinstone Mill Compound was the favorite place where the bonfire took place. The last time the bonfire took place was on the day when the Prince of Wales landed in Bombay. 1942 movement. Well, the resolution was passed in Wardha and it was endorsed in Bombay. On 7th and 8th of August, All India Congress Committee met at the Gwalior Tank Maidan. Gwalior Tank Maidan is opposite Tejpal House. And the coincidence of history is that in Tejpal House, in 1885, Indian National Congress was established. At least I did not know till I read this book. What a strange coincidence. The party was formed at that place where the same party declared quit India. But quit India was not a very unanimous decision. Rajaji was opposed to quit India. And Rajaji's reasoning was that Japanese are knocking at our door. And he was not prepared to exchange British with the Japanese. And on that issue, Rajaji resigned from the working committee of the Congress. Well, the book says 1942 was Gandhiji's masterstroke. Perhaps it was. And perhaps it was not. Because Quit India movement put all the national leaders behind bars. And the field was left open to the Muslim League to do their manipulations with the British. But Quit India is a moment in Indian history which even today excites every young Indian who cares to read Indian history. Gandhi tried his level best to maintain Hindu-Muslim unity, and Bombay was the venue of his parlays. Once in 1938, he had 2 meetings with Jinnah in Jinnah's house. The issue was who should speak for Muslims. And Jinnah was adamant that only Muslim League can speak for Muslims and no one else. Gandhi was unable to persuade him. The second meeting took place in 1944, and that meeting lasted for 18 days. Gandhiji was making his last-ditch effort to prevent the partition of India. But Jinnah was adamant, and Jinnah maintained two-nation theory. And that was the total collapse of Gandhiji's vision of Hindu-Muslim unity. This background tells us the importance of Bombay. In this book, there are so many places mentioned, which I was trying to find out whether I know any of those places. I think Dr. Usha Thakker may engage some youngster to carry out a research to find out those places, and at least they are entitled to a plaque that this is where Gandhi did this. For example, in Karnak Bandar, Gandhiji took a vow in 1920 that from that day onwards he will wear only khadi spun, which is made by the hand spun yarn, and he never broke that vow. There are innumerable places which are mentioned. Innumerable people they are there. I think all of them deserve a biography of at least a page. This is a task which somebody should take. The number of people who had come forward. There is a very interesting episode mentioned by pertaining to Sir Kawasji Jahangir. At a meeting, Sir Kawasji Jahangir referred to Gandhiji as Gandhi Seth. And then he realized that he has made a mistake. So he tried to correct himself, and he said, I mean Mahatma Seth. The moment he said Mahatma Seth, the house came down. And there are any number of small incidents which make this book absolutely delightful. I would like to conclude by reading a passage from this book which beautifully sums up what Bombay meant to Gandhi. And it is the last paragraph of the second last chapter of the book. It reads, "The association of the Mahatma with Bombay has a long history. It contains pages from the life of the Mahatma and the people of the city. It provides glimpses seen in Bombay of his unconventional approach to politics, his innovative strategies, his ability to bring together and mobilize people of different ideological streams, his human qualities, and his ways of communication. The response of the people of Bombay to his call was no less important. He energized the city and the city nurtured him. Thank you so very much.
I'll now request Naresh Fernandez, the editor of Scroll.in, to give his observations. Naresh.
Thank you. Good evening, honorable members of the panel, distinguished authors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to use the book actually as a point of departure. I'd like to begin by conveying my warmest congratulations to Usha Ben and Sandhya Mehta for the publication of Gandhi in Bombay towards Swaraj, and thank you very much for inviting me to the event. Gandhi, as we know, is a figure who's inspired tens of thousands of books, and the library in this building is testimony to that. But the specific subject of Gandhi's intense association with Bombay has remained unexplored since K. Gopalaswamy's book published in 1969, the year I was born. And Usha Ben and Sandhya Mehta have done us all a great service by exploring this relationship in the night of new scholarship, both about Bombay and about our city. When K. Gopalaswamy's book came out about 50 years ago, India lived in its villages, and cities were viewed with some moral suspicion almost. A great deal of the way post-independent India perceived cities was attributed to Gandhi's idealization of village life. And yet, when you read this most interesting book, it's clear that the metropolis of Bombay played a vital role in shaping Gandhi's life. To begin with, as Ram Gua, who has devoted more of a decade of his life to writing a multi-part biography of Gandhi, has noted, if Mohandas Gandhi had not failed in his attempts twice to set up law practice in Bombay, soon after returning from his studies in England, he wouldn't have taken up that job in South Africa. He wouldn't have faced all the challenges there that prompted him to think about the world in new ways, and he probably wouldn't have become the inspirational leader that the world now admires. So in some way, his two initial bruising experiences in Bombay were crucial to the making of the Mahatma. Gandhi, as we know, had a complex relationship with Bombay. Shortly after he returned to India in 1915, after spending 21 years in South Africa, he told one of his nephews, "I don't like Bombay. I see here all the shortcomings of London and find none of its amenities." Despite this, Gandhi would end up spending 17 years of his life in this building, and soon he was referring to the city as the hope of my dreams. The city would be the testing ground for some of his ideas and the place from which he announced some of his key strategies, as Mr. Shahani has pointed out, such as non-cooperation, Swadeshi, and prohibition, though the last program wasn't one that many people in Bombay welcomed with any enthusiasm. There are sort of accounts of all sorts of delegations going to Gandhi to beg him to allow the liquor trade to flourish, Parsis, and even the Archbishop of Bombay. Given that Bombay was India's industrial and commercial capital, it wasn't surprising that many of his staunchest funders and the funders of the independence movement lived here. As Gandhi would go on to write, "Bombay is beautiful not for its big buildings, for most of them hide squalor and dirt, not for its wealth, for much of it is derived from the blood of the masses, but for its generosity." Gandhi was so intricately involved with Bombay that it seems to be impossible to research anything related to this city in the first half of the 20th century without running into him. And I'd like to recount 2 or 3 instances where he's come up in my tiny projects over the past few years. 3 years ago, when I was trying to research a project about Bandra, I came across a very intriguing story of a group of about 1,000 Polish children who had found refuge in India during the Second World War. Many of their fathers had been killed by the Soviets in the tragedy that is now known as the Katyn Forest Massacre after the region in Russia, where more than 18,000 Polish officers were executed. In an improbable leap, many of these children were invited to India to find refuge by the rulers of the princely states of Navanagar and Kolhapur. They made a long, tortuous journey, much of it overland, to come to Bombay and India, and were housed for a few months in the building that was the Khoja Sanatorium on Bandstand in Bandra and on Mount Mary to recoup their energies before going on to their final destination. I heard about them from a friend's mother who's now in her 18s, and I was determined to track them down. since the internet is an amazing tool to find people, I managed to make contact with some of these Polish children in 2013 when most of them were now in their 80s. And they were just about to organize a reunion in the US. Many of them had gone on to the US after the war since their parents had been killed and they had no reason to return to Poland. I interviewed some of them on Skype and by email, and they shared their memories of India and India's generosity. It was the simple things that mattered. A man named Franzen Herzog, who was 82 when I interviewed him, spoke to me about their arrival in Bandra. He said, the first thing we did on coming to the house was to get a good meal. And after the meal, we went to the bathroom to take showers. What a luxury. But life in Bandra was also filled with adventures, such as sneaking out at night for a swim in the sea, running barefoot across fields, chasing peacocks without stepping on a cobra or a scorpion, which was possible, and climbing trees and swinging on the vines and pretending we were Tarzan. On Sundays, there was ballroom dancing to a crank-up gramophone. And amidst all of this, the singular memory that stood out for many of the people who I spoke to was a meeting they had with Gandhiji. One of them has written about the encounter, and she said, in front of us stood a small old man emanating such power that he seemed to be a giant. Decades later, when this woman saw Richard Attenborough's film Gandhi, she said she had the urge to stand up in the theatre and shout, I had the honor to meet this man and talk to him. He was a great man. Around the time I was speaking, I was interviewing the Polish people. I was also doing some research on the history of jazz in Bombay, and Gandhi seemed to be everywhere. The first African-American musicians who came to India in the 1930s were very familiar with the ideas of the Mahatma, and since his views about emancipation and struggle were widely discussed in the African-American press. When the first African-American delegation came to India, led by a cleric named Howard Thurman, they, of course, went to meet Gandhi, and they had a long discussion about race and religion. When it got late, Gandhi asked them to sing Negro spirituals to him, and the encounter ended with them singing songs like Climbing Jacob's Ladder and Were You There When You Crucified My Lord? Gandhi's influence on Indian musicians in a variety of traditions has also been well documented. But I was especially interested in an encounter that Gandhi had with a young Goan trumpet player named Frank Fernand in 1946. Fernand had attended several of Gandhi's discourses, and he told me that these lectures changed his life. He began to try to find a way to play jazz in an Indian way. Those standard jazz histories credit American musicians like John Coltrane with infusing jazz with Indian elements in the 1960s. That effort had actually started 2 decades before that, right here in Bombay, thanks to Gandhi. Another musician who was deeply influenced by his meeting with Gandhi was a guitar player from Hawaii named Tao Moe. At some point in the 1940s, Tao Moe had a brief meeting with Gandhi. And this is how he described it. He said he was a very educated man. I enjoyed the 35 minutes I spent talking to him. The musician thought that Gandhi's dhoti was very similar to the lava lava worn by Pacific Islanders. But Gandhi told him that it was unusual to see, but he told Gandhi that it was unusual to see the garment tucked between the legs. He said, Gandhi laughed and said, well, I'm better off than you Polynesian people who walk without shirts. Which is strange because Gandhi also walked without his shirt. Papa Tao, as he came to be called, spent many years in India, and his students went on to play a vital role in developing the techniques that would allow the guitar to be incorporated into the family of Indian instruments. It's now played by people like Brij Bhushan Kabra, all of whom sort of descend in a lineage from Tao Moe. I haven't found any evidence that Gandhi actually came to know about how his encounters with a diverse group of people inspired them to rethink their lives, their political struggles, and their art. Of course, the joy of such improbable interactions is what characterizes the experience of living in a city, especially a great city like Bombay. To me, these episodes that I have described reiterate the enormous power that Gandhi had on our city's imagination, a power that we're still trying to understand. Congratulations again for this marvelous book.
May I now request Sugato Ghosh, who is the Director of Global Academic Publishing, Oxford University Press, to talk about the publication and how they feel about it.
I'll just try to respond to that question. And I wish that I did not suggest the principal author sitting over here to arrange for this book launch this evening. Even before I got to see the pages in the manuscript, that was the basic idea, that this book should be launched here in a wonderful evening, perhaps early January. And today I'm a little bit of overwhelming a situation, or that's how I feel, because it also marks the end of the baby's birth, and it also when the baby gets out of the parent's control. So thank you once again, congratulations, and Ms. Mehta. So it's almost 1 year back, over 1 year back, sitting in that small little room where she calls it as her office. We started discussing this, and I don't think you did try hard to explain the topic to me. Before the first sentence was over, I said, we got to do this book. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Oxford University Press, I welcome you to this launch of Gandhi in Bombay. And yes, as Mr. Sani very rightly pointed out, we will only talk about Bombay today, not the Mumbai of contemporary India. As a department of the University of Oxford, we believe in furthering the university's objective of excellence in research, scholarship, and education by publishing worldwide over in 51 countries that we are present, and through 181 sales colleagues across the world. Our diverse and eminent publishing program includes scholarly works in a wide variety of academic disciplines. And while our majority of our publications cater to the researchers, scholars, institutions, and policymakers, the ideas and knowledge that our products do generate through our authors are very relevant to society at large. In an effort to make these ideas more accessible to general audiences, we have initiated a program to shape our academic research-generated content as serious non-fiction titles. We want to offer these titles to inform general readers who still like to read in their Kindles or in their books, who would like to go deeper into issues of the world without getting bogged down on the overly academic language that we used to use once upon a time. Gandhi in Bombay is one of the first titles in this new effort. Interspersed with the Mahatma's letters, speeches, published writings, and more than 50 rare photographs depicting important events in Bombay, this book projects a scintillating vision of the city in the throes of the independence movement that continued for so many years. We're thankful to Usha Thakker and Sandhya Mehta for considering the press for this volume. It was an enriching experience for people like me, my colleague Rekha, and the editors who work at the press, and are delighted to present this to the readers this evening. This well-researched book will be an invaluable addition, that's our belief, to existing literature on Gandhi that the press globally is extremely proud of. Now, this is only that much I can say today in this overwhelming evening, sitting in front of the august crowd like you. We have authors sitting here in the dais. I don't think I should take more than this. So good evening, and thank you once again for being here today. Thank you.
Now the main function. May I request today's three panelists, Professor Bhikkhu Parekh, Mr. Satish Rahani, and Mr. Naresh Fernandes, to formally release the book. Thank you so much. Now that the book has been formally released, a small comment about the cover page. When somebody saw the cover page for the first time, they said, is not it quite unusual for the topic and also for the Oxford? I said, yes. In a way, yes. Like both the man and the city, it's quite trendy. So I think you will all like that. People have liked that. It does look unusual for a book of this type, but it's delightfully done, and the backdrop is of Mahatma's room at Mani Bhavan. So now may I request Professor Bhikkhu Parekh to give his keynote address. Bhikkhu. Professor. Yes, also. Bhikkhu Bhai, please.
Well, I'm supposed to give a keynote address, and I'll make sure that that's what it is. Usha Ben, Sandhya Ben,
Just 1 second.
my good friends, that's fine, Satish Sahani,
Just 1 second.
Naresh Fernandez, and Yogesh Kamdar, and distinguished guests. You have seen, you will read the book. Those of you who haven't had the chance to read it, I've had the opportunity to read it and write a foreword. So that puts me in a slightly complicated situation, because if I really were to say what I think about the book, I would simply end up repeating what I said in the foreword. And that would be monstrously evil. So what I thought I would do is to step back a little. Not talk about the book itself, although I can't ignore the book, but talk about the book from a slightly different angle. In the book, the main argument which Gandhi makes again and again is that Bombay is beautiful. He says Bombay the beautiful, Bombay the generous, Bombay the great, and all that. Why is it so beautiful? Why is it so great? And he says, because it has a long tradition of philanthropy. It's public spirited, it shares its wealth with less endowed people. Why does it do that? Why does Bombay have this tradition? And Gandhi says, well, Bombay alone has this tradition, other Indian cities don't. Well, that's extraordinary for him to say, who has only got to know Bombay for a few years. And he says that is because of the presence of the Parsis. Now that is my starting point. As somebody who is known to have done quite a bit of work on multiculturalism, including the book I wrote when I was a professor at Harvard, I'm particularly interested in the catalytic effect of the presence of a minority. And Bombay, Gandhi says, has been made by the Parsis. That's why it is different from other cities. Now that's, for a Hindu or anyone else, is an extraordinary thing to say. To say that Bombay is philanthropic only because of the Parsis is to imply, A, that the rest of the population, including the Hindus, are boring, morally obtuse people with no tradition of philanthropy, and to condemn a whole community forever and ever. And secondly, to say, to attribute to the minority community the enormous power of impacting on and perhaps transforming the culture of a city. What entitled Gandhi to make these two assumptions? That the Hindus do not have this tradition, and he would, if you had asked him, give us the examples of peculiarly Indian cities, as different from those cities which India threw up in response to the West, in response to Britain. Now Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, three would be seen as Indo-British cities. If he had been asked name a city which is uniquely Indian, he would have said Ahmedabad. Baroda, of course, is different, which is where I come from, but Ahmedabad would have been pointed out, or he would have pointed to other cities. Now, in those where there are no Parsis, and Ahmedabad has very, very few Parsis. So the point he's making is that Hindus do not have the tradition of philanthropy, at least philanthropy of a public kind. Private kind, giving money, spending one's time for others, well, that's fairly common amongst them. But publicly oriented, public spirited, civic culture, which reflects itself in philanthropy, is missing in the Hindu cultural tradition. And if you were to ask him, is this true? He would have said yes. And I have argued, and I wish to argue, that this has been his lifelong preoccupation. To take over the culture of his forefathers, the tradition into which he was born, to cherish its values, but to rectify its deficiencies. And one of its deficiencies was this absence of public spirit and civic culture. Which is why his transformative effect on Hinduism was to say, look, here is a religion which is noble in its own way, but can be so contemptible. I mean, the way it treats the untouchables, the way it treats the animals, the way it treats the lower castes and all that. And therefore he makes humanism, Manav Seva, the center of Hinduism. And I think his impact on Hinduism is profound precisely because he goes about transforming it and makes it speak the language of active humanism. But where does this tradition of active humanism come from? And it comes from Christianity and the Parsis. And what Gandhi does, therefore, is grounding himself in Hinduism, reaching out to Christianity, and Jesus, of which he was so enormously fond, taking over the idea of love, translating love in the language of active service, because if you love somebody, it reflects itself in active service. So I think the first thing that one learns from this, not so much from this book, because the book is not about it, but the first thing one learns about this is how Gandhi uses his years in Bombay to reorient his moral focus and to concentrate on the Indian culture. The second aspect, as I said, was how could a small community have such a significant impact on a society? Now, this is something worth thinking about, and I don't think in India we have really thought about this. I was talking to someone who said to me that Parsi contribution to the culture of Bombay and the culture of Gujarat has been far more than that of any other community. Where it was Mumbai Samachar that they started, Parsi contribution to comedy, Parsi contribution to economy, Parsi contribution to public culture, Parsi contribution to politics in the shape of Firoz Shah Mehta and Dadabhai Nauroji, Parsi contribution to bringing Indian and Western music together, that this very small community has been so significantly catalytic. Question is, Gandhi was right, that Bombay is different because of Parsis. How was a small community able to make that kind of impact? Have there been other examples in history? Now, this is not a class in a lecture on comparative literature, but I would have immediately thought of Jews. Jews in Germany, or Jews in Britain, or Jews in every European country making this tremendous impact. And the small community is able to make this kind of impact, A, because it is not hidebound, like a majority community could be. B, it's open to outside influences because it always lives on the margins of society. And how the marginality of an individual, the marginality of society, of a group, allows it to draw on all different sources and create what Yoga and Kanda rightly call an amalgam. I mean, Gandhi was profoundly marginal. He was marginal to the West. He was marginal to India. And I think we call him Hindu, Rashtrapita. But if you look at him, how much does he share in common with an ordinary Indian? And the answer would be very little. When Narendra Modi talks about Swachh Bharat, I mean, here was a man cleaning up latrines. Something which we had regarded as an activity for the lowest caste, here was a man who made it the vocation of his life. So much so that Gokhale was frightened and said, look, this man can't belong to my Servants of India society. Everything about him, if you come to think about it, the most un-Indian Indian that I can think of in our history. In South Africa, he brooded over the future of the country he loved. And he began to recognize its failings, its mistakes, and came with a plan of how to transform it. So the small community was able to make an impact because it was marginal and therefore it could easily change. Now here I think, while Gandhi is right about talking about Bombay the Beautiful, it is also important to bear in mind how, reinforcing the point I was making earlier about the Hindus, how we have been so reluctant to engage in philanthropic activities. When Bajaj came over here to Mumbai and he was asked by Gandhiji to raise money for the Congress fund, he wrote to Gandhi saying, look, nobody would give me any money. J.D. Birla wrote to him saying, look, these Indian businessmen wouldn't give money because they are frightened of the British government coming down very heavily on them. Tagore, remember that famous incident? Tagore Shanti Niketan had no benefactors. It was kept going for a little while, and Tagore Shanti Niketan was running into difficulties. And then when he was about to die, 6 months before he died, he turned to Gandhiji and said, look, will you take custody of this place? Will you look after it? Will you promise to look after it long after I am gone? And Gandhi said, yes, I will, but why do you say that? Why do you want me to do this? And he said, look, I have not been lucky enough. Unlike you, I haven't got rich friends. I go to them and come back empty-handed. I am deeply fearful of my institution going to the dogs after I am dead. Will you promise to take care of me? And he says this in a most beautiful sentence that I have ever read from Tagore, where he says, this vehicle, this Shantiniketan is the vessel that carries the cargo of my life's greatest treasure. A vehicle carrying the cargo of my life's greatest treasure. Will you, Gandhiji, promise to look after it? And Gandhi said, of course, there is no question. And we know what happened. He looked after it wonderfully well. But the point is, philanthropy had not... Tagore was, in spite of this wonderful experiment where Pandit Nehru had sent his daughter, and lots of Indians kept migrating between Gandhi and Tagore. A great tradition in those days of starting your early school in Tagore and then coming to the Western education or the Gandhian education. So we have this extremely weak tradition of lots of people had suffered as a result of this lack of civic culture of sharing your wealth with others, and how Tagore and others had to depend. And that, I think, also, we don't appreciate what the source of Gandhi's power. If we were to understand that the Mahatma was not a saint, and I'll say something about it in a minute, because I think there is a danger of turning him into a little god. He was not. But the point is that he had his own sources of power, like any politician. Here was a man who was surrounded by some of the greatest men in our history, like Panditji, Vallabhbhai, Rajaji, all those people. How was he able to keep them all together? Why, if Narendra Modi's cabinet can see some resignations, why were there no resignations from Gandhi's leadership? They all stayed loyal. They may disagree. Swaraj disagreed, moved away. Vallabhbhai was disappointed. They were disappointments, but they all stayed loyal to him. What was the source of his hold over them? Over the masses, because he controlled the masses. How did his hold over the masses come? And there you begin to see that one of his sources of power was his contact with these rich people who were able to spare him money, like Birlas and Jamna Das Bajaj and others, who then Gandhi will use that money to support, sponsor activities of this kind. Bombay, I think it becomes particularly important because as a cosmopolitan city, Gandhi was, and also progressive city, he was able to draw upon a large different sections of society. He was able to draw upon women who had actively participated in public life, and that experiment then Gandhi tried out in other parts of India. Clothes burning, areas in textile mills and others which Gandhi was able to draw out. And I think as a result of all that, he created a movement which showed him how to bring in different groups of people and weave together into a kind of coherent program. What I briefly now want to do is to turn to the other side of the story and how a man, a Mohandas who became Mahatma, through tremendous internal and political struggle and was able to hold this kind of power over his countrymen, is also now being systematically denigrated. I find it very difficult to go to a meeting these days where the Mahatma is not under fire. Many of us for years turned him into, not many, but many people turned him into a saint. He could do no wrong. Nowadays, he could do no right. And I think it's important to understand why that is so. I remember talking to Richard Attenborough, the man who made Gandhi film. He was president of Gandhi Foundation in London. And when I succeeded him as president, he told me a story, which is widely known, because I have talked about it on other occasions. When he was making this film on Gandhi, he went to see Panditji. And he told Panditji, share your memories of Gandhi with me, and introduce me to all the other people who knew Gandhi so that I get a complete picture about the subtleties, the layers and layers of his personality. I want to get under his skin, which I can only do if people can fill in the details. So Panditji spent a lot of time with him. And then at the last meeting, when Panditji was on the ground, on the floor, showing him all the pictures, their family album pictures, and Richard was choosing a bits from here and there. He collected what he wanted, and he left the room. As he was leaving, Panditji ran after him. And Panditji then said, Richard! Richard stopped and said, yes, Prime Minister. Whatever you do, don't turn him into a saint. Gandhi was much too human to be a saint. And I think those who make the mistake of turning him into a saint invite the counter trend of those who don't want to see anything good about him. And I just want to end by sharing one or two thoughts on how this denigration process is going on. So much so that in Ghana recently, the university professors compelled the university to withdraw his statue because he was supposed to be a racist. And the kinds of charges made against him are that Gandhi was a racist, and the evidence is a few remarks he might have made about, or he did make about blacks in South Africa, or his attitude during the Boer War, or his attitude during the Zulus. That he was a casteist, that maybe he did a little bit here for the Dalits, but by and large he stopped Ambedkar and others from organizing them in a systematic way. He was a great conservative, and he was also pro-capitalist, so that he legitimized Indian capitalism. Now these are many of the charges that one hears about him, and there was a debate in Ahmedabad at Gujarat Literary Festival where I tried to answer those charges. I think the important thing in mind is, of course, the man had many limitations which we all have. The question is not whether he had those limitations or not. The question is, what did he do about those limitations, and whether at the end of his life he had been managed to get over them. So the story is, how does Mohandas turn himself into Mahatma? That arch, and during the process, as Gandhi once said, that some of us have to be judged by the amount of dust we collect during the course of our lives. And in his case, I think he began with all the prejudices of an ordinary Indian or an ordinary member of the British Empire. Went to South Africa thinking rather low of blacks. Lots of us did. Over time, he began to realize, began to change his views. Likewise, about caste system, he had certain views and increasingly began to change his views. Some still remained, and he remained conservative, but nevertheless, he gradually became more and more progressive. And on the capitalist front, I think where he is often attacked, very unfairly, because as he recognized the Hindu culture's limitations, he began to argue that for the trusteeship theory, which meant that no individual is his own creator. He is created by society and others. His powers, he didn't create himself. So all the individual's powers and capacities are the gifts of others. It's through your education that parents give you, through the DNA you get from them, through the influence your culture has, you have become what you are. With the result that you are a custodian of your powers, you are not the owner of your powers. And if you are a custodian of your capacities, then whatever your capacities produce is not yours. You are a trustee. You hold it in trust for the rest of mankind. Now, at one level it becomes vague, but increasingly again, as he grew older, he began to say, look, this idea has to have teeth. And he was prepared to, he in fact asked Agarwal and one or two other people to design a taxation policy which would put this trusteeship into practice. What would the taxation system be like? So here was a man who had begun, again, as an economic conservative, who slowly moved via the notion of trusteeship into a far important, a deeper kind of socialism than you would find. The point which was made by Jayaprakash Narayan and Lohia and others in their books. So I think what we need to remember about this man is not just his greatness, undoubtedly as it was, nor his smallness when he began his life, undoubtedly as it was. What we learn from him is the trajectory of his life, not the beginning, not the end. And the story of a small, timid, frightened man who couldn't stand up before a judge in a court of law, nervous, timid. How this man, by sheer willpower, transforms himself, never into a brilliant speaker, he never was a good speaker, but nevertheless, A person with tremendous hypnotic power. How did that happen? That story of self-transformation, self-creation is to me the essence of the Mahatma. And as long as we learn something from that story of how an individual through sheer determination can transform himself, if we can learn something from it, we would have learned something from the Mahatma. And that is his message for us. And the book fills an important gap in that story. What was he doing during his Bombay? And at one level you can see his different periods of sojourn in Bombay as steps during which he is constantly transforming himself. When he comes here, as Satish said, didn't like those welcoming parties and all that, things begin to change, and he is then able to address large meetings. So the story of this self-transformation is the story of the man told in this book, and I commend the book, but more importantly, I commend this way of looking at the Mahatma. Not to denigrate, not to sanctify him, but to see him as an ordinary mortal like us, who could reach great moments in his life and attain some great things. That is the story. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Parekh, for this scintillating talk. And you, of course, brought out some unknown facets of Bombay, Parsis, and Gandhiji and his views about him, as, quite a few things were not quite known to us. Now I request both the authors to talk about their creation. First, Usha Thakker, thereafter Sandhya Mehta. Usha.
Professor Bhikkhu Parekh, Mr. Satish Sahani, Mr. Naresh Fernandez, Dr. Sugata Ghosh, Sandhya, Yogesh and friends. Bhikkhu Bhai, many thanks for your illuminating comments and analysis of Gandhi, his life and work. Really, it was fascinating. Now, about our book. So as I start talking about our book, I remembered the times when Sandhya and I used to have intense and interesting discussions about Gandhi in Bombay that led us to trace the footsteps of Gandhi in Bombay, now Mumbai. We slowly got engrossed in the project and were soon overwhelmed by the enormity of the subject. As the distinguished speakers have rightly pointed out, the material was enormous and it was very difficult to sift the material and to pick up what we liked or what we wanted. But certainly it was a learning experience, an exciting journey, and never a dull moment. So gradually we learned that records of words and deeds of Gandhi are available. We just have to look for them. The memories of Gandhi's times and work are treasured in many places around us, in this city, and glowing facts of history are often tucked in the fading pages of the annals and archives. We found so much material in this very library and in the archives too. Now the story, this is a great story of Gandhi in Bombay. So the story of Gandhi in Bombay is spread over the chronicles of meetings, protests, processions, hartals, political actions, mass mobilizations, people's aspirations, as well as actions, but all capturing powerful moments of unfolding nationalism at the local level. As Mr. Sahani said and Mr. Fernandez also pointed out, that there are many exciting scenes, many powerful scenes that come before our eyes, like the marching of khadi-clad men and women on the streets, the young and old bearing the lathi blows and courting prison, women picketing against the shops of foreign cloth and liquor, Desh Sevikas marching fearlessly, people spinning tirelessly, Gandhi calling for satyagraha, building his teams, like what Bhikkhu Bhai has brought out it so beautifully well, that how he was bridging the bridges and between various sections of the society and bringing them together, keeping their diversity intact. his meeting swelling in thousands, his arrest from this very building of Mani Bhavan, non-violent battles undertaken by the people. These are all scenes from that story of the struggle to achieve independence. Now, innumerable individual and collective experiences are woven with this mega story, which is told and much remains to be told. Telling and retelling of the story of the city and the leader is important. Our city is extraordinary, and so is the leader. So our book is a modest attempt to catch glimpses of this mega story, encompassing a symbiotic relation between Gandhi and Bombay that spanned over decades and got strengthened over time. We all know today, from our own experience, that this city, bursting with activities, is often overwhelming, at times even exhausting, but never dull. So during Gandhi's times also, the city was full of vitality. Bombay, by the time of Gandhi's arrival, was already a center of commerce, finance and textile industry, as well as a hub of diverse intellectual and social reform activities. If Gandhi's leadership was magnetic, the city's response was magnificent. And Gandhi's important nationwide movements are intertwined with the life of the city and its people. See, Gandhi was full of energy and the city with vibrancy. So this blending resulted in the powerful synergy that created history. Bombay vibrated with unprecedented activities during the period of the freedom struggle. Mr. Sahani has already brought it out. The Rowlatt Satyagraha, the non-cooperation movement, the Khilafat movement, boycott of the Prince of Wales, protest against the Simon Commission, the civil disobedience movement and the Quit India movement all demonstrated Gandhi's leadership and fearlessness of the people in the city of Bombay. As we started collecting the material about all these incidents, as well as Gandhi's leadership and the spontaneous response of the people, we were simply overwhelmed. It was wonderful to know this aspect of the city, which is usually called the commercial capital. So Bombay was also an important site for Gandhi's propagation of Swadeshi and Khadi work. So let us not forget that the first Khadi Bhandar in the country was opened by Gandhi in our own Morarji Gokaldas market. And in addition, Bombay has witnessed Gandhi, the fundraiser at his best. The city was the single largest contributor towards the Tilak Swaraj fund, and an amount of about 37.5 lakhs was collected in the year 1921. So far back. And Bhikkhu Bhai has presented an impressive analysis of Gandhi's views on philanthropy and trusteeship. See, and as we all know, though Gandhi never liked big cities, he chose Bombay as his karma bhumi. And Bombay remained important for Gandhi throughout his life. It was here that his voice was found an echo, his activities got encouraging response, many of his strategies got formed, and a large number of his colleagues and followers assembled. As Yogesh said, Bombay took to him as one of its own. It's fascinating to explore when Gandhi visited the city, what he said, whom he met, which meetings he organized or attended and where, what movements he launched and why, who he worked with, what he did and where, how he mobilized the people of the city, what were the obstacles he faced, and what were his strategies. So suddenly, the history of the city, the history of the movement, and even history of some leaders and many unknown freedom fighters started blending. So these little and large pieces of information put together make a rainbow collage that present a remarkable story of Gandhi in Bombay. And a re-look at this collage is refreshing and enriching. At least we found it. It was very enriching. So naturally a project like this took very long, and support of many well-wishers and friends was required, and we were fortunate to have it. So over the years, Professor Usha Mehta, we remember her very fondly, Professor Alu Dastur and Vasantbhai Pradhan have told us many known and unknown facts of the times of the freedom struggle. Again, we are very fortunate that we could meet many known and unknown freedom fighters in Mani Bhavan. And Mr. Pratap M.B. Velkar, I'm glad he is with us. He has shared many of his memories. And we thank Mr. Jagdish Agarwal, Mr. Pratap M.B. Velkar, and the Asiatic Society of Mumbai for providing valuable photographs and images for the book. And Bhikkhu Bhai, you have been wonderful, a great support for the book. So heartfelt thanks to you for all your support and thought-provoking speech today. Mr. Satish Sahani, many thanks for your continued firm support. Not just temporary, but continued. And valuable comments and suggestions. We must act on that. And Mr. Naresh Fernandez, many thanks for your great interest in our project and meaningful and delightful comments. And Dr. Sugata Ghosh, thanks for your wholehearted cooperation and significant comments. And I remember the day Dr. Sugata Ghosh came to Mani Bhavan and we met. And as he rightly said, just after a little while he said, okay, we must have this book and we'll have launch right here in Mani Bhavan. And I'm so delighted, and Sandhya is so happy that this could happen, and that also in Mani Bhavan. So we are very happy to have Dr. Sugata Ghosh and Ms. Rekha Natarajan from OUP on the occasion of the book launch. They have been with us throughout. Our sincere thanks to them and the Oxford University Press for seeing the book through various stages of publication. And a big thank you to the members of the Mani Bhavan family, Sandhya's family, my family, and all friends who have assembled here. Thank you so much.
Sandhya Ben, please.
Professor Parekh, Mr. Sahani, Mr. Fernandez, Usha Ben, Yogesh Bhai, and dear friends. The journey of this book is long. It started few years ago. While leafing through the pages of collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, we often came across a phrase written by Gandhi, Bombay the Beautiful. Both Usha Ben and myself wondered what could be the relationship of Gandhi and Bombay, and this led us to pursue primary sources. Maharashtra State Archives, libraries of Asiatic Society of Mumbai, and Mani Bhavan Gandhi Sangrahalaya helped us to explore deep into the search of the special and mutual relationship of Gandhi and Bombay. One of the fascinating experiences was to browse through the pages of Bombay Chronicle. The paper founded by Usha Mehta was pro-nationalist daily, published from Bombay. It extensively reported Gandhi's activities of civil disobedience, Khilafat, Khadi, Swadeshi, non-cooperation, boycotts, and bonfires. The paper carried very interesting editorials and headlines, like all-day protest demonstrations in city, Mahatma heartily cheered on the way to Bombay, Mani Bhavan in London, bomb explodes in the second-class compartment at Churchgate, etc. Advertisements also published in Bombay Chronicle to inform the people about the public meetings were very exciting. One such advertisement was of mass meeting organized by Satyagraha Sabha at French Bridge and Shantaram Chal to celebrate Gandhi's arrest. Another one appeared in February 1919, urging people to join public meeting at French Bridge to protest against the Rowlatt Bills. The march would start from Dhobi Talav, and the route given was Kalba Devi, Bhuleshwar, Girgam Back Road, Sandhurst Road, and finally culminating at the French Bridge. The names of these familiar places opened up the pages of history. The movements were electrifying. The people of Bombay spontaneously responded and supported Gandhi politically and financially. The main centers of the activities were Shantaram Chal, Murarji Gokuldas Hall, Congress House, Muzaffarabad Hall, Kalba Devi, Mulji Jetha Market, French Bridge, Chopati, Azad Maidan, Guwaliya Tank Maidan, and Mani Bhavan. Let me tell you some trivia about Mani Bhavan. It was exactly 100 years ago when Gandhi first came to live in Mani Bhavan in 1917. This became Gandhi's headquarters whenever he was in Bombay from 1917 to 1934. This iconic building was visited by many prominent leaders of those days like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Sarojini Naidu, Annie Besant, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and many others to discuss political issues with Gandhi. I hope this is enough to stimulate your interest to read and enjoy this book. To conclude, we thank you all for coming here and supporting us. Thank you.
So we come to the end of today's program, and it's my very pleasant duty to propose a vote of thanks. First and foremost, Professor Bhikubai, thank you so much for coming here. He's flying back home after a few hours, and still he thought it fit to come and talk today, and thank you so much for your scintillating talk. Thank you, Satish Rani Saab, for your wonderful exposition and finding out. And of course, thank you, Naresh, for those nuggets that none of us probably knew about jazz music and how Gandhi and Polish immigrants and all were connected, and brilliant. In fact, that also must be included as an appendix to this book. It was so brilliant. I thank Oxford University Press, Mr. Sugato Ghosh and Rekha Natarajan for being so prompt, so efficient and so professional in making this book a possibility within such a short span of time. And thank you Usha Ben and Sandhya for, of course, bringing out a wonderful book, and also for donating the entire proceeds of your royalty to Mani Bhavan. And on behalf of Mani Bhavan, I thank you both for this generous gesture. Thank you all for coming here and making this function a big success. For today, the book is available downstairs at 20% discount. Those who wish to purchase are free to. Thank you so much.